She had walked the last 4 miles to Cedar Bend on blistered feet, and when the ranch house finally came into view against the dusk, Nettie Shaw stopped in the yard and made herself say the words before her courage failed her entirely. "I'll cook for you," she said, before the man on the porch had even risen from his chair. "I'll clean, mend, keep your garden, tend whatever needs tending. I don't want wages. I only want a roof and a floor to sleep on, and I'll work harder than any woman you've ever hired to earn it." Ellis Trapp set down the harness leather he'd been mending and studied the woman standing in his yard road dust thick on a dress gone thin at the seams, a small bundle of belongings clutched to her chest like it held everything she owned in the world, which he suspected it did. She was younger than her exhaustion made her look, with a straight back and a steady gaze that told him she had not come to beg, exactly, whatever her offer sounded like. "You've come a long way to offer free labor, ma'am," he said. "Most folks asking for shelter want wages along with it." "Most folks asking for shelter haven't been turned away from every boarding house and church door in 3 counties, Nettie said, and heard the rawness in her own voice before she could smooth it away. "I'm not looking to take advantage of your charity, Mr. Ellis Trapp. Mr. Trapp, I'm looking to earn my keep honestly, in the only coin I've got left to offer, which is my 2 working hands." Ellis had buried his wife 18 months back, and in that time he had let the house go the way houses go, when there's no one left in them who cares to keep them dust settling into corners, meals eaten standing at the stove, because sitting alone at the table had come to feel like its own particular cruelty. He looked past Nettie at the darkening road behind her, empty in both directions, and understood that whatever had driven her to walk it alone and hungry was not a story she meant to offer up easily. He also understood, watching the careful, guarded way she stood in his yard ready, he suspected, to be turned away again at any moment, that whatever pride she had left was the last thing she owned outright, and he was not about to be the man who took it from her by making this harder than it needed to be. "You've eaten today?" he asked instead of pressing further. "Not since morning," Nettie admitted, and the admission seemed to cost her more than the long walk had. "Then come sit," Ellis said, rising from his porch chair at last. "We'll talk terms after supper's in you. A body can't reason straight on an empty stomach, and I'll not have you deciding anything, nor me deciding anything about you, while you're near fainting on your feet." "Where's your people?" he asked. "Dead or done with me," Nettie said. "My father passed 2 years back. I kept house for my aunt in Milford until her son came home from the war and decided a niece with no dowry was one mouth too many to feed. I've been making my way since, taking in washing where I could find it. There's no more washing to be had this side of the county, not for a woman traveling alone with no husband's name to vouch for her." She said it plainly, without self-pity, and Ellis found himself believing every word of it, the way he'd have believed a man reporting honest weather. "I've a spare room," he said finally. "Was my wife's sewing room. You can have it and welcome if you're willing to do what you've said, but I'll pay you proper wages besides, not charity. A woman working a man's house ought to have money of her own, whatever else she lacks." Nettie's eyes went bright and she blinked hard against it, unwilling to weep in front of a stranger on the first evening of what little safety she'd found in longer than she cared to count. "Thank you," she managed. "I won't give you cause to regret it." She did not in the weeks that followed. She scrubbed the dust from every corner Ellis had let go, put the kitchen back into working order, mended shirts he'd been wearing torn for want of anyone to fix them. She was, Ellis came to notice with a kind of quiet astonishment, good company besides quick-witted at supper, gentle with the barn cats, humming softly over the washtub in a way that had begun, without his quite realizing when it started, to fill up some of the silence his wife's death had left behind. He kept his distance from her all the same, careful and correct, because a man did not take liberties with a woman under his roof for wages, whatever warmth had crept unbidden into his chest. But he watched her and worried over her, in ways he had not expected to allow himself again. The trouble came, as it so often did in a small place like Cedar Bend, wearing the shape of a neighbor's concern. Mrs. Odella Fitch, who owned the mercantile and considered herself the moral custodian of the whole township, arrived at Ellis's door on a bright September morning with her mouth already pursed for disapproval. "It's being said all over town, Mr. Trapp, that you've a woman living under your roof unmarried and unchaperoned," she announced, before he'd even properly opened the door. "A widower and a stray woman of no family, keeping house together like man and wife with no ring between them. It isn't decent, and I mean to see it stopped one way or another before it stains this whole community." Nettie, wringing a dishcloth in the kitchen doorway, felt the old, familiar dread rise in her, the same dread that had chased her out of her aunt's house and every boarding room since, the sense of being a burden and a scandal both at once, welcome nowhere for long. "Mrs. Fitch," Ellis said, and there was a new hardness in his voice Nettie had not heard from him before, "Miss Shaw works this house honestly, for honest wages, same as any hand I'd hire to work my herd. There's nothing indecent in a woman earning her bread." "Appearances matter, Mr. Trapp, whatever the truth of it," Mrs. Fitch said. "Either she takes a room in town proper or the arrangement wants regularizing." "Then I'll regularize it," Ellis said, "in my own time and for my own reasons, and not because you've come to my porch to dictate how I run my household. Good day, Mrs. Fitch." He shut the door, perhaps harder than strictly necessary, and found Nettie standing pale and still in the kitchen, her composure cracking at last. "I'll go," she said. "I won't have you shamed on my account, Ellis. I've caused enough trouble to enough households already." "You'll do no such thing," Ellis said, gentler now. "That woman doesn't run my life, and she'll not run yours either. Give me time, Nettie. I don't want to rush you into anything on account of a mercantile owner's wagging tongue, but I'll not let her frighten you back out onto that road, not while I've breath in me to stop it." It was not, Nettie understood, quite the promise it might have been, but it was enough, that day, to still the panic in her chest, and she found herself trusting him a little more for the plain, unhurried honesty of it. It was a hard frost in October that changed the shape of things between them. Nettie came down with a fever bad enough that Ellis rode for the doctor himself, rather than send a hand, driving his horse harder through the cold dark than he'd driven anything in years, some old, sharp terror rising in him that he did not have time to examine before he was pounding on the doctor's door demanding he come at once. The doctor pronounced it a lung fever, dangerous but not certain to be fatal, and left instructions and a bottle of tonic, and not much else in the way of comfort. Ellis sat up 3 nights running at Nettie's bedside after that, changing cool cloths and spooning broth past her cracked, fever-dry lips, terrified in a way that surprised him with its depth. He had sat a bedside like this once before, watching his first wife slip past anything medicine could reach, and some old, raw dread from those nights rose up in him now, twined tight around this new fear until he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. "Don't you go and die on me," he told her low on the second night when her fever had spiked bad enough that she did not seem to hear him at all. "I've buried one wife already, and I'll not bury a woman I haven't even had the courage to properly court yet. You hear me, Nettie Shaw? You've got to stay." She did not hear him, not then. But by the third morning the fever broke at last, and she woke to find him slumped exhausted in the chair beside her bed, his hand still wrapped loosely around hers, and understood, somehow, that he had not once let go of it in 3 days. "You didn't need to trouble yourself so," Nettie said, once the fever had broken and she'd found strength enough to sit up and take proper notice of the hollows under his eyes. "I'm only your hired woman, Mr. Trapp." "You stopped being only my hired woman some while back," Ellis said, before he'd quite decided to say it aloud. "I don't rightly know when. Somewhere between the mended shirts and the humming over the washtub, I expect." Nettie's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I sat up 3 nights afraid I'd lose you, and it wasn't the fear of losing good help that kept me at that bedside, Ellis said, plain as he said everything. I've come to care for you, Nettie. More than a man ought to care for a woman he's only known some months. I don't offer this lightly, and I don't offer it because you've nowhere else to go. God knows I'd not have you feel cornered into it. But I'd be glad, gladder than I know how to properly say, if you'd consider being my wife instead of my hired woman. Only if it's what you want for yourself, and not merely the safest door left open to you. Nettie looked at him, at the careful, worried steadiness of his face, at a man who had nursed her fever with his own 2 hands and now stood offering her not rescue but partnership, asking nothing she did not freely choose to give. I came to your door offering to work for nothing but a roof, she said slowly, because I believed that was the whole of what I had left to offer anybody. I did not expect, walking up that road half-starved, that I might find a man willing to offer his name instead of simply his charity. Her voice steadied, warmed. I'm not saying yes because I've nowhere else to go, Ellis. I've had nowhere else to go for 2 years now, and I never once said yes to anything on account of it. I'm saying yes because I have come in these few months to love you, your steadiness, your fairness, the way you never once made me feel small for arriving with nothing. I would be glad to be your wife. Something in Ellis's careful, weathered face broke open into a smile she had not yet seen from him, wide and unguarded. Then I reckon, he said, we'd best tell the preacher before winter sets in proper and he's got no roads left to travel. They married in November, in the same small Cedar Bend church Ellis had once buried his first wife from, and Nettie stood at the altar in a dress she'd sewn herself from cloth Ellis had bought her without being asked, feeling, for the first time in 2 long years of wandering and want, entirely, permanently home. Mrs. Fitch attended too, seated stiffly in the second pew, and had the grace to offer Nettie a small, grudging nod as she passed, not quite an apology, but as close to one as the woman was likely ever to give, and Nettie found she no longer needed it to feel her place in Cedar Bend was finally, fully secure. I walked 4 miles into your yard with blistered feet and nothing to my name, she told him that night, and you gave me back everything I thought I'd lost for good. You gave me my house back first, Ellis said, drawing her close. The rest was only fair trade and glad I was to make it. Outside, the first snow of the season began drifting soft against the windows, and inside the house that had stood too quiet for 18 long months, there was, at last, nothing quiet about the warmth between them at all.